Susanna, we are so happy to have you. Thank you, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much again for the lovely introduction, a very long one. It's very flattering, but thank you very much for inviting me. I assume you're seeing the slide, correct?
Yes, perfect.
Excellent.
It's working,
right.
yeah.
Okay, so there we are. Let me start with an outline. So I've decided, like I said, I come from the life sciences, you already heard. So I know this is not necessarily the area you work in. So my goal here is to try to give you a little bit of a brief history of FAIR, because you're already doing FAIR, and NFDI is already doing FAIR, so you know everything very well. And hopefully I might mention things that you perhaps not necessarily aware. I want to talk about FAIR awareness. And awareness at school level, yes, I have this new role in Oxford, so I thought I want to plug it in because I think it's important that FAIR awareness is done at all levels to be able to really implement it. And obviously then I want to focus on the Elixir, the broader infrastructure for life sciences, and highlight a couple of resources that my team runs, and how it's interconnected to this ecosystem of resources which is out there, which is again something you probably are doing or will be mimicking in your area, because you have a lot of resources too. And I want to close with some challenges and next step broadly in the context of EOSC as well and FAIR. So I want to start with the acknowledgement, because I'm going to use a lot of slides which come from colleagues, especially Carol Gobler, Philippe Roxera, and Alison Lister, and Philippe and Alison are in my team. And Carol, as you know, it's a colleague in Elixir, and she leads the Elixir UK node, and also colleagues which are a participant to the resources that I mentioned in this slide. So thank you for those to contributing content and ideas for this presentation. So we know very well what FAIR is, why it was published, when it was published, and also let's highlight the fact that FAIR was defined because we need resources to be discoverable at scale by human and machine. That's really all that matter. And we know very well why they were developed, because we are all using to make discovery data which has been shared in the public domain, but this data is not necessarily easy to find, easy to cite, and when it is, it's not necessarily understandable by a third party because it's not richly described, or if it's described, it's not described in a standard manner that's interpretable and reusable immediately. This is just one slide, which I really am not going to go into the detail because it's a simplification of the 15 principles we are all very familiar with. What I want to highlight are the key topics being identifier and metadata, are the essential core, are the pillar of FAIR, are the technical pillar of FAIR, I will say. And I want to also specify that FAIR doesn't mean open. There is no O in FAIR. There is A, which is talks about accessibility. So the importance of making term of access and licenses very clear when we share the data. So the principle obviously are indeed our guiding principle. And you will see that I will use these as the reason why we have some challenges now, but this will be the final part in my presentation. All I want to say at this stage is these are not standard, as we know, and it's important to remind ourselves. There are different ways of making data fair. All those can be valid as long as the data is usable by human and machine, and as long as data is fair for the community that it's building it. And fair, it's a continuum of increase of reusability. The more things make the data reusable, the better it is. But fair has also been very useful as a brand. That is nothing new. We all have done research data management for donkey years. And the reason why now suddenly research data management is important is because really the FAIR brand has echoed worldwide the importance of making good data representation and sharing it in a way that's reusable. And that's why it's been widely adopted by publisher, by funders, by all stakeholders at academic level and industrial level, so private and public sector, by consortium worldwide, by big organizations. So it is really become the norm of the norm, and the norm that has bring both together all this community around good research data management. And this is a great news for many of us who have been working research data management for many years. and this has never been considered research, or has always been considered a support activity. But now it's really at the core of research, because now we are also doing research on improving data management. Anyway, we also know that we live in the digital area, and FAIR it's so important because we need to ensure the data is also reproducible, not just fair, but reproducible. And we know that it's still very challenging. We also know very well that we're already in the area where data need to be used by machine at a scale. So the machine readability, it is essential as well, as long as the human readability of the data. We know very well that there's been many years now, the funders, as well as publisher, as well as other policymaker, are releasing a policy which are more stringent, stronger into the data need to be shared appropriately, in the right way, in the fair way. We also know that the publisher are changing the way we publish data. What data means is not just anymore about data set, it's about the software, it's about the model, it's about the workflow, it's about the code, and it's very important. A new avenue for sharing these digital objects are being developed. Excuse me. And we also know that if we need to convince and change the culture of data sharing and good data and good research and management, we need to give incentive for the researcher to make sure that those research outputs are in the public domain in the right way. This is simply a slide to remind us the fact that FAIR is also now has become a business opportunity for many publishers that have developed data support services, data publication tools, and publishers are still, we like it or not, some people don't like the idea, but publishers still remain anyway, an important actor. They cover a leverage point, especially in the academic setting, where publishing still is an important type of output. It's not the only one, should not be the only one, but still is one. And so there is a number of data journals, data articles, which really enable us now to not just to publish the data set, but publish also the software, the code associated to it, but also publish data that's probably come from negative result, long-term data, curated aggregation. Before it was really hard to try to sell the curated aggregation, curated data set could give new insight as a research article, because we only had research article and this type of activity wasn't considered research. Now it's important, and we have different article type to publish all this work. The FAIR have been so successful that community have started extended the FAIR principle for other digital objects. So if you're not familiar now, there's been now for actually a couple of years already, a FAIR, 10 simple rules for making training material fair. These come from the Elixir community. And very recently, actually, from the RDA working group, there's been a publication on extending the FAIR principle for research software, where some principles are new, some principles are extended, some principles are redefined so that they fit the concept of software and similar other digital objects. Because like I said, sometimes we talk about data, we imply data set, but in reality, we need all the digital objects to make sure that we can reuse any data sets. It's also important to remind ourselves that fair or good research and management is not the job of one stakeholder. We really need all the stakeholders to really play the right part, play their role, their contribution. That's why it takes a village. We need the researcher in the private sector because they generate the data. But we need the trainers, we need the data stewardship, we need the research software engineer, which we need to recognize and make sure that those careers become professional and recognized, and they can support and work with the researcher or even develop new researcher and new methods to improve data stewardship and data management. We need the program director, we need the institutional director, we need the service provider, the research infrastructure, we need all the authority, we need all the policy maker and everybody which has an influence in order to ensure that really FAIR becomes the norm and it gets implemented. So here we talk about personal, project, organization, and public responsibility. And this will help me give you now quick overview, I want to briefly show the example what's happening in Oxford. So I want to show you how an organization, now a university like Oxford, it's taking responsibility to implement FAIR, in which context. And then I'm going to quickly cover how any research infrastructure or a consortium, I want to call it, like Elixir in Europe, it's taking care of implementing indeed the FAIR, obviously at a larger scale. So talking about what's happened in Oxford, we actually just a couple of months ago launched a program called Research Culture Program. And we have created 3 pillars. We have created a pillar that covers career, a pillar that discusses research practice, and a pillar that discusses value and contribution. And we have actually 2 academic leads that lead this pillar. My colleague, David Gavagan, in computer science, he leads the academic pillar. And myself, I lead the research practice pillar. And currently the contribution and the career are merging into one. So when we say we want academic leadership, because sometimes, you know, in an institution, if you have the research services, the professional service, try to do something. I don't want to say impose something to research, but try to create something. You know, the academics want this independence, and they are the one actually working in the area. So that's why at university level, we decide to create this program where we have academics lead, and we are working, bringing together the researcher in the divisions, in the departments, along with the professional service, the library, the research service, the IT research, which are essential in the support of research culture. And we have obviously, which is very important, the support of the Vice Pro-Chancellor, because you need the bottom up and the top down to be able really to succeed and change the practice. So what do we want to change, and how these relate to FAIR? Well, we want to move the concept that we have now, which is what's good for career nowadays, is you need to be fast, you need to publish in Nature, you need to have groundbreaking results, you need to have the big grant, you need to own the data, and it's all about you. Towards what's really good for research, it's good to collaborate, to share data in a meaningful way, recognize diversity of skill, the contribution of the software engineer, for example, of the data curator. What we want to recognize is open transparency and rigor of the work. And so we want to bring the dial from what's good for research to what's good for researcher career to what's good for research, because at the moment is not. So in the program here, the reason why we are doing it, we are responding also to a number of policy. Now, some of those are UK policy, some of those are global policy, but I'm pretty sure those exist in all countries. We have sector concord, that we have a lot of agreement, as well as we have community principle, including the FAIR principle. So there is a lot of push in doing things in a better way, and we need to assist researchers actually to do that. And we need to enable Oxford to become a sector lead in the area. So what we have done to promote career, we have set up a researcher hub, where we are looking at the different career destination. We are looking at the different role that the researcher play, because like I say, there aren't just, let's say, bench scientists, there are data curator, there are research software engineer, which are essential in being the tool, the service that make the data flow. And we want to recognize all those roles, all those players, and make sure they have a career path, because currently they don't. In the research practice pillar, which I'm leading with the colleagues, we are focusing on developing, first of all, core training activity that covers the different area that research practice encompass, which is illustrated by the diagram on the left, which include research data management, FAIR data, but include many other things. And we want to focus on core training, as well as creating pilot project and creating policy. Now, because it's so broad, the area of research practice, we are going to first and foremost focus on enabling how the researcher can plan the research, can execute the research, and report the research. And this is going to be our first focus. So we are working within Oxford, but we are working with external organization. For example, in the context of UK, we have the UK Reproducibility Network, and actually the Reproducibility Network, they have a national chapter in many other nations beside the UK. but we're also reaching out EOS, NFDI, and what actually all the global organizations are doing, because in this case, we need to go cross-disciplinary. Now, before I move to my next slide, I see that there are 2 comments in the chat. I'm not looking at the chat because I cannot see the chat when I share the slide, but if there is anything I need to be aware, please let me know. Otherwise, if those are questions, we can, excuse me, go over the question at the end. Okay, so why we want to do this, why we want to bring this awareness, and we want to, give incentive, because it's essential. If we want to enable fair data, if we want to make sure that people put the data in a repository, use the right identifier, use the right standard to describe the metadata, and share it at the right time, in the right way, in a way that's understandable to other people, we need to also give them the time, the assistance, and the rewards, and recognize that the time they put there need to be part of their, for example, promotion review, because this is really important. If we don't change all the policy, if we don't change all the process, we are never changing the culture, we're never encouraging the researcher. Okay, it was just like a brief, really overview, also to show that we need to start working in the different ecosystems, and each institution, it's an ecosystem. Now, Oxford, for example, it's part of the Elixir, which is a bigger ecosystem. It's an research infrastructure that focuses on life sciences, and that's why people involved in the life science are also working in the context of Elixir, and those connections are essential because they bring excuse me, disciplinary practice, disciplinary norm, and hopefully enable to change the culture within the discipline, but also give information about the type of training, the type of resources that also need to be used in that area. So you probably know what Elixir is. It's a European infrastructure. And the idea is to bring together all the digital infrastructure for the life science data, coordinating all the national capability. So we work in a hub and a spoke model. There are 23 nodes in Elixir, and there are over 220 organizations. It's about practice, it's about service, it's about resource, it's about community of practice. It's about bringing together the expertise and the knowledge. So the people as well, the capacity and the capability. So under Elixir operates in around 5 technical platforms, which are tool, compute, training, interoperability, data. And there is a growing number of community which work in specific disciplines that they bring their expertise and they build what's specific for them. So within the interoperability platform, I'm one of the exco with a couple of colleagues, and we deal with the challenges of delivering fair data and working with fair data and actually enable the reuse of data. So this is really like an overall screenshot of what the interoperability platform is supposed to deliver: a fair service framework. We need to bring together the resources that each node has. These are the tools, the annotation tool, the registry, the catalog, the services. We need to bring the standards which are developed outside Elixir or with Elixir contribution, and those can be technical standard, technical protocol for sharing data, PIDs, identifier schema, reporting requirement, terminology, model, format. There are so many. There are thousands of standards out there. We need to bring the method as well, which are the protocol, the process in which we can do good research and management and fair data. And we need to bring all this together and bring it together in 2 ways. So first of all, we need to first create a sort of knowledge hub so that people within Elixir and outside Elixir know the services, know what resources there are, what standard there are, what the method there are. But also we want to don't just list them, but showcase them in action through what we call interoperability story, because everybody has a different data journey depending on the type of data you have, depending on the type of goal you want to meet, depending on the tools which are available to you. There are different journey, and different tools can be used in different combinations. So through the interoperability platform, we want to be able to illustrate proper examples. So I'm sorry, those are really busy slides, but it's really to show you, to give this overview. So the concept of the service framework is that you have all these resources, which are some of the, excuse I'm recovering from the flu, so I really apologize, but sometimes I cannot knock off. So there are many resources which actually are contributed by the node and serve different purposes. And some of them are used within certain projects in Elixir where Elixir participate. Some are actually already mature enough to be recommended by funders. Some are nascent, so are newer. And some also are integrated, connected to global activity, being like, a Fair Digital Object Forum, the RDA in general, CoFair activity, and so on and so forth. So there is a lot that going on that need to be mapped within the Elixir Interoperability Platform. I want to give examples of how we build this interoperability story using obviously projects which are more closer to me and which I'm more familiar with. For example, we need to be able to ensure that the different metadata authoring tool, so that these are tools that help researchers to describe the experiment, to describe the subject of the experiment, to describe the type of assay that has been done, to the type of measurement, the result, and etc. And so the descriptor of the experiment, and there are many of those, and it's important that there are many because they serve different purpose, but it's also important that the description of this experimental reporting, it's anchored to a relatively similar format where the detail can be added, and all these different tools can use the similar format. And this is why, for example, there are a group of activity and a group of tools and tool resources, which I'm listing here, some of which, as you can see, are not even part of Elixir, come from the external community, like the NASA GitLab, for example. They work together to ensure that the authoring tool is accurate to the ISA metadata format. An example of interoperability story and also of community of practice coming together. An example of a FAIR journey, I mentioned earlier, each of the Elixir participant and Elixir node will have different type of FAIR journey, because within your node, within your project, within your lab, you will have, like I say, different data types. You will have availability of different type of tools, and depending on the journey, so depending on your tools, or what you have and where you need to go, you want to just make data public, you want to make it harmonized, you want to make it richer, you want to add terminology, you want to create a workflow, you want to share the workflow, depending on what you need to do. You will have to build your FAIR journey, and through this journey, you will have to then select the right tool, the right standard, the right methods. And that's exactly what we are also building in the interoperability platform, and try to make sure that those examples of FAIR journey becomes public, because they are true example that somebody can mimic, and somebody can actually see what does it mean to make data fair in a certain context. In the knowledge hub, so I say the interoperability platform, we are trying to create a knowledge hub where we put everything together so people know what there is, what the offerings are, and then create this interoperability story giving examples of what interoperability means and what people are doing. So the knowledge hub at the moment, it's really like a site and a website that really shows what Elixir offer, and also guide people to understand which of the resources have what kind of guidelines and what kind of practice, which one have more detail than the other. And then we are working to connect them. So in the broad, fair research management know-how ecosystem, I would say there are some key players within Elixir. We have the RDM kit, which is a guidance and context for RDA services. We have the data stewardship wizard, which really helps the user to write data management plan. We have the FAIR cookbook, which gives data recipe to make data fair. And we have the FAIR sharing, which is a registry of standard and repository. And then we have also a training material. We have tests, which is a training registry. And also, for example, within the Elixir UK, this is just to plug what Elixir UK is also doing, which is very much geared toward training. It's creating RDM bytes. So this is training material into video, which are bytes onto certain area of the research data management. Now, indulge me, sorry, with the second part of my presentation, where I'm going to hopefully briefly give you an overview of the FAIR cookbook, why it's important, what role it plays in this ecosystem, and so the fair sharing. And then I'll try to close it by bringing everything together, how these resources are connected and connected to other resources within this ecosystem. Because in order to do a data journey, you will have to move also from one resource to another to find the information that you need to build your journey. So the FAIR Cookbook, it's really a collection of recipes that covers the operational steps of FAIR data management. It's really for FAIR doer because it's really more in-depth expertise. This is something I want to say in advance, it's open for people to contribute. You can join in to contribute, you can just use it, or you can just adopt it, mentioning your training material, for example. I add here also the link to the preprint that gives you more in depth of who has developed, how is it sustained, which collaboration we have, how we have tested, and how we have evaluated in the context of training as well, because I won't have the time to touch on all this concept. I only want to tell you that it's, like I say, it's an open resource, and because it has been built in the context of the FAIR Plus, which is a project coordinated by Elixir, which is a private-public partnership, which is just completed, it's really focused on life sciences and focused on certain data types that were of interest to the industry. And the idea is to cover recipe that really cover all the processes that are important for FAIR data management, giving examples, but also highlighted the skills and the challenges. So there is a nice search wizard that helps you to find different recipe. But the reason why I want to highlight that, it's really to say, because finding the right recipe, it's essential. You need more than one recipe to then build your data journey. And depending what you want to do, you want to enhance discoverability, you want to use terminology. So depends you want to do, you will drill down into detail. What really the cookbook also help you to do is to understand where are you in your FAIR journey? Have you done enough verification? Because there is no one measure. So you might want to only emphasize discoverability. If that's all you want to do, you might only need a certain number of recipes to get to the mature stage of discoverability. You don't have to do much more. So it's important to understand what your goal is in order to apply verification that's enough for that goal. There is also a specific recipe that shows the verification framework, because people might not even know how to embark in the journey of how to verify the data. So there is one specific recipe that really gives you a very generic framework for you to understand what verification and making data fair is, and help you also to stop at the right level that's relevant to you. It's an open resource that it's open to contribution, and all the people that have contributed are also acknowledged, because again, we want to acknowledge the expertise. We are turning knowledge into recipe, and these are knowledge from people, and people need to be credited. So not only the recipe are citable, but they are also credited through the ORCID ID and also to the credit attribution ontology. If you look and if you pick up any recipe, you will see that it's composed by different sections. There are text guidance, there is some graph, there are some code, sometimes it's actionable, sometimes it's not. And there is also connections to other resources. So for example, if we want to point you to standards and we want to tell you what type of standard are relevant for a certain data type that you are verifying, then we will point to the FAIR sharing. And so let me give a very quick overview of the FAIR sharing resource. So the FAIR sharing is a registry that goes cross-disciplinary. So while the FAIR Cookbook was really very much focused on life science, FAIR sharing, it's cross-disciplinary. We have standard, database, and policy. And for standard, we cover terminology, model, format, reporting guideline, FI schema, a lot of them. And we have over 3,835 records across these three registries. And we have over 1,000 contributors. I'll come back to the contributors in a couple of slides. So what you can do with FAIR sharing, what you can do in general as a user, it will help you guide to choose the right standard resource and policy relevant for what you are doing, for your data type, where you need to pause your data type, how you need to standardize your type of data type, but also help the producer of this resource, if you are developing a standard, if you are developing a policy, to make it known and available and accessible and visible to people outside your direct domain. because there is so much going on. And what we also do, we interlink. So we are both an educational resource, but also a service. There are people that use our interface to find the content, but through our API, people are powering assessment tool, data management plan tool, using the content from Fair Sharing, because we connect these resources. So we are able to tell you if formats are related, if the guidelines are related to a terminology, what database implement, which standard, what policy recommends which resource. It covers all disciplines. That's why I want to highlight that physics, it's also a discipline. So I really encourage you to look, but I know that somehow you're also connected, and I'll come into this shortly. This is just to say that we work with a number of stakeholders: library, research infrastructure, individual, publisher, funders, because it's really quite well connected for sharing to many resources. Very quick overview of the detail that you will see. I really particularly don't like screenshot. I should have not added screenshot, but just glancing through, you will see that the description, for example, of a Campbell database in this case, but if you take a standard, for example, will give a lot of detail about their resource, the license, in this case, the standard applied to the database, the policy that they are, who is the maintainer, what's the life cycle, and so on and so forth, and showing the relation. And the relation will be shown in terms of table, but in terms of graph. And these are these knowledge graph which we are building, because in order for you to understand how complex the landscape of the standard, who uses the standard, who are connected to which standard, it's what we're doing, the relation. But we're also working with organization. This is a new feature. We are working with organization, and even NFDI can be an organization, and you will see that. Like I say, we have already a connection with you, but you have research infrastructure, you have institute, we have people that want to build what they call their own FAIR profiles, which means they want to show the repository that they endorse and they recommend or they have developed, and they want to endorse and show the standard that they have recommended or developed. And this is why we are building profile around the organization and tag the organization with WAR, which is an identifier for organization, like Corgi is an identifier for people. We have also started doing this with some of the pharma, like a prototype testing, because everybody wants to build this profile to compare and see if they are using standard that others are using too, or if they should enlarge the recommendation list. We are also working a lot cross-disciplinary, especially with the EOS cluster. And so we are building this visualization and collection info sharing of the standard repository that this research infrastructure I've built and are recommended. And these serve as a glance view, like I said, a profile overview. Something very new as well, we have launched very recently a Fair Sharing community curation program. So what we are doing, we are bringing together experts from the community to curate the content according to their area of expertise or the community they come from, to influence the content in Fair Sharing, to gain attribution, because we attribute people when they help, and to engage with us, and to engage with other community, and to learn as well how complicated the ecosystem of standard and repository is. So they help us and we help them. And this program has been launched thanks to the funds by the RDA and the EOSCA Future, an ambassadorship program to Alison Lister, which actually is the curator in community content of Fair Sharing. And what I put then on the left-hand side, it's the disciplines from when the expression of interest from this curator came from. And you see, it comes from, they come from all the different communities. So I want to show you the first 16 curators that are part of the community program. They're all available from our website as well. And the way that we credit their contribution in curating the content that's relevant to their expertise or to their community, it's to push that contribution to their ORCID profile, because now Fair Sharing has become a trusted organization for ORCID, so we can push the content to ORCID and to the person or working profile, so that they will show what record they're maintaining, what curation they're doing. And actually, among the 16 curator, we have one that comes from the NFDI for cat, and this is Sarah Espinosa. I don't know if Sarah is on the call, but if she is on the call, we really look forward very much to work with you, because like I say, the program has just started. So this is a great opportunity to work together and enrich the content, the fair sharing element of the content that's relevant to the NFDI for cat, but also to the other FDI if you wish. So let's go back. So I'm coming out now of the fair sharing overview, and I'm going back to what I started with, which is we are building under Elixir Interoperability Platform, this knowledge hub. So this fair research data management know-how ecosystem, which has these resources. I've just presented for cookbook and for sharing, but there are others. And what we need to do is to be able to connect them, because we want the user to be able to navigate from one to another. And that sounds simple, but isn't, because as you know, these are the type of activity that rarely get funded or get visibility, because it's the behind the scene nitty-gritty connection, but they're essential. So we are doing all these connections, how to connect all the different registries and the different resources, so that we improve the user navigation, the user experience, and ultimately we have more impact of this resource, and we change the practice and hopefully change the culture progressively. So I want to give you an example of this navigation. It seems boring, but it does hopefully explain the reason why this has to be done. The very simple example is everybody needs identifier. If a user needs identifier, which are key element of FAIR, as you know, one need to be used to need to be ones need to know what identifiers there are for which digital type, how to use it, and how to mint it, and et cetera, et cetera. So, for example, if the user entered the RDM kit and it's there and it's looking for identifier, there is a section identifier. That section will have some more information that points both to the FAIR cookbook as well as to the data stewardship wizard. In this case, will point to the FAIR cookbook recipe on identifying the right persistent identifiers, and at the same time will also point to the FAIR sharing site, because there we list identifier schemas, and therefore there you will also know which identifier schema are used by which repository, as the connection that FAIR sharing does. And similarly, the connection between the RDM kit to the data stewardship wizard. Data stewardship wizard, it's a sort of creation data management plan tool, will walk you through a set of steps, and it will ask you, to explicitly make sure that you identify the data and guide you to use the right identifier. So this is the connection that we are making. Let me now move towards the final part of my presentation. So, and this is about the challenges and the next steps. So first of all, I want to point you to a very recent landscape study. This has been released, I think it was in November during the EOSC symposium. I put the link underneath because I don't want to duplicate the slide that I've already the results, which are very well described in this study. But I think this is very important to read. Perhaps you won't be surprised by what you will read, because you will think, oh my God, so much still need to happen. But it's true, there are still things that we perhaps have thought we have addressed and almost resolved, but you realize that when you talk with the researcher, they still are far away from, have improved their experience on knowing what FAIR data is, or even knowing what repository to use. So there is still the gap that we need to fill between the resources we are building and reaching out to the community, which is out there and still struggling perhaps with the day-to-day activity, or perhaps they aren't, but they are actually not implementing the guidance and the work we have developed. So there's still a lot that need to be done. So, and the landscape study, like I said, it's very important. It's cross-disciplinary. quite good number of response as well. They also surveyed repository and not just researcher across all the field of science. I just took the screenshot of the awareness of the fair. As you can see that just about 2/3 have some level of familiarity with the principle. 1/3 has never heard of them. And you can always think about that 2/3, what some level of familiarity really means. So it's quite challenging, but this also means that there is a lot that still we all need to do within their own disciplines, across disciplines, and even collaborative to make sure that the message reaches the right audience. So let's also look about, why we are still in the situation that, we haven't resolve the problem, why we haven't addressed the problem. I think the history of the problem is in the definition of the fair themselves and in the original paper. But I said at the beginning, fair, it's not a standard. It's not a list, it's not a method, it's not one implementation, it's not one technology. It is not. And it's exactly, in a way, this is the problem. They are principles and they're open to interpretations, and that's exactly what somehow has probably created such a huge uptake because everybody has found their way in, but in a way that's why there is so much diversity. It's still an opportunity. Diversity is good. Again, let's remember, it's not a standard, it's a set of principles. So we really need to understand what within our community making data fair means. And like I said earlier, it's important to implement the concept of fair enough. We don't have to verify to death. We have to make data fair depending on the goal and the challenge that the researcher has. And that's difficult sometimes to understand and to define. So in order to fulfill the dream of making data fair, we need to really do several things. Obviously, we all work in research infrastructure, so we need to continue to develop those research infrastructure, those tools, those service, the registry, and all the other things like Elixir is doing, like NFDI is doing. We need to harmonize the standard because I was talking with Sonia earlier during the before doing the presentation. There are so many standards out there for all the disciplines, yet there are so many gaps as well. And sometimes there are competing, contrasting standards, and it's very difficult for a user to understand which one to pick or potentially how to harmonizing it. We also need to address the policy. There is a lot of policy out there which are great. They say, good data manager, pick the right standard, choose the right repository. I really cringe when I see the words, the right standard, the right repository, the mature resource, because that doesn't really help the user to know what to pick and how to pick it. And perhaps one can argue that the policymaker shouldn't be necessarily the one to spell out what is the right resource. It's up to the community. Yet it means that we community need to make the list of resources which are important. That's why we have this collection info sharing, where you as an organization can spell out from your viewpoint, what's the database or what's the standard that you recommend to your community, because these are the guidance policymakers should point to. We need education at all levels. It takes a village. We say that we need to work in the research organization, but we also need to work within our own institution, and in own institution within our own group, and etc. So there are so many levels of activity that we can do and influence that we can have. Training is essential. It's underfunded. We know very well. We develop tools. We have very little time and funds to do documentation, a nice video, a training material, or a course. We know that. But we need to do better that, because training is essential. We need to overcome the usual technical, social, cultural challenge. We know that this is not just a technical challenge, making data fair, it's a social challenge. We are all used to certain norms, or doing things in a certain way, using a certain tool, using a certain format, and changing it means time and effort and a learning curve. But we need to do that. And especially if there are two, let's say, competing standards, we need to merge. It's challenging because we know very well that those that have developed standard, let's say that they have developed terminology or ontology, they might not have had much funds to develop those, let alone to converge them it's really hard. But again, there are challenges that we need to overcome, and these are social and technical. We need to identify the motivator. I talked about motivator and credit in several occasions, you know, like the ORCID things, when if a curator comes to free sharing, we want to recognize, similar in the recipe, you know, we flag the ORCID, we get the credit ontology. These are all small things that we can do, and we need to do more of those. Or at the school level, for example, we need to add the sharing of data and the sharing of good data, you know, as part of the review criteria or even a promotion criteria. It is important to do those changes at whatever level we are and wherever we are, because without those credit mechanisms, we will not have changes, and the researcher will not be motivated, and they are essential because they are the creator of the data. I'm almost done, just a couple of minutes. So I want to emphasize also some other role here and some other future challenges and future steps. There is so much discussion about fair evaluation and fair assessment. Some people like it, some people doesn't like it. This is my clock telling me that I have done. It's 45 minutes, but I'm almost there. So, so many fair evaluator tools, so many fair assessment tools. A lot of people like it. A lot of people doesn't like it. I mean, the word evaluation, the word assessment, it's seen as a judgment, it's seen as a punishment. People are very concerned to be assessed in terms of fairness. Also because, like I said earlier, you have your own fair journey. You need to be fair enough. So it's really important that you stop where you need to. So if somebody evaluating you, we need to be very cautious that this is not turned something negative. But anyway, there are a lot of tools which some are doing evaluation, some do assessment, some are doing assistance into make data fair. There are so many. And we're talking about actually 19 or plus, more than 19, because my count is from October, from a website that we maintain here. And so this is a bit challenging here because, like I said earlier, not everything that matters can be measured. And so it's a very tricky thing, but what's more worrying here, it's that this tool really gives different results. So you can do assessment or evaluation with a couple of these tools. You will get different results because they are looking at slightly different things. They are measuring them in a slightly different way, but they're also showing the result in a different way. So it's almost like comparing apple to orange. And that's the reason why one of the task force in EOSC, which I'm part of and is chaired by Mark Wilkinson from the FAIR guidance, it's the EOSC task force on FAIR metrics and data quality task force. In the FAIR metrics subgroup of this task force, we have very recently, so these are really off the press, released two reports which have been approved by the EOSC Association. And one report really focused on this apple-to-apple comparison. So on the challenges of having to measure FAIR and having to compare tools which are different, and the roadmap and the work that we have started to do as a task force, along with a big number of people which are not author, but they're knowledge, which come from the tool that are out there, to harmonize how this tool can really measure fairness and can help in assisting rather than assessing. And there is another document as well where we talk about how are we then governing this assessment? Not that we want to govern it, but how do we, for example, extend a fair assessment that's generic, that goes across disciplinary if you're using an identifier versus if you're using the right standard for that data type. That becomes really discipline specific. So how do we govern the creation of indicators that becomes very specific for a domain? So they work for the different disciplines. So I really invite you to look at this document and comment on them because these are really the beginning of the next work that the group will do. And to close my presentation, reminding that this is work in progress. It's a team sport and it takes a village, but we have to do it. And the way that we have to do it, this is representing this slide, which reuse existing material, but revising it, we need to make it possible. So we are doing the right thing to build the infrastructure, to develop the skills, which is important. That's why the training is essential. To make it easy, showing the use, like the usability story, interoperability story, make it normative, make it adopted within our community. So that's why our expertise to community is essential. Make it rewarding, give the incentive, and make it required, embed in the policy. And with this, I thank you very much, and I'll take any question. Thank you.